The old farmhouse stood in eerie silence against the backdrop of dense forest, its weathered facade telling stories of decades gone by. There's something inherently wrong with places that have witnessed too much. They hold memories in their walls, echoes in their shadows. This remote property, rented for my cousin Elena's 30th birthday weekend, was rumored to be such a place. As our cars pulled into the gravel driveway at dusk, an unnatural stillness settled over us, as if the surrounding wilderness held its breath, waiting. I'm not a superstitious man. As an architect, I value logic and structure. When my sister mentioned the local stories about the place being haunted, I dismissed them with a practiced chuckle. The caretaker who handed us the keys avoided eye contact, muttering something about staying away from the back area of the property, especially after dark. His warning registered as nothing more than small-town folklore designed to intrigue tourists. The evening unfolded pleasantly enough. We grilled on the patio, toasted Elena, and shared stories as the sun surrendered to darkness. The property's isolation became more pronounced after nightfall. No distant headlights, no ambient glow of civilization. Just us, enveloped in a darkness so complete, it felt tangible. I couldn't shake the sensation of being watched from the tree line, though I attributed this to the unfamiliar surroundings and perhaps one glass too many of bourbon. It was around 2 a.m. when the first disruption came. My nephew and niece woke up crying, their small faces contorted with fear. Their parents tried to calm them while they spoke over each other, describing what had roused them. A baby crying somewhere in the yard. Not a cat, not an animal, but distinctly human. I volunteered to investigate, partly to prove there was nothing to fear, partly because sleep had become elusive in this unsettling place. 3 of us men ventured outside with flashlights, scanning the property methodically. The beam of my light caught something white, fluttering near an old shed. Just laundry, forgotten on a line, though for a moment, my heart had leapt into my throat. We found nothing unusual, yet the sensation of being observed intensified. The darkness seemed to press against us, almost solid. My brother-in-law whispered that it felt like the air had thickened, making each breath a conscious effort. I nodded, unwilling to voice my agreement and give substance to the irrationality. Sleep came in fitful bursts. My dreams were invaded by the sound of gentle weeping, just at the edge of audibility. I awoke repeatedly with my shirt damp with sweat, my heart racing against my ribs like something trapped. Each time, I convinced myself it was just the wind through the old house's many cracks. Dawn brought no relief. While making coffee, my cousin Marco called us to the back door. Outside, clearly visible in the morning dew, was a trail of small footprints, the size of a toddler's, leading from the porch across the yard toward an old stone well I hadn't noticed the day before. The cover was weathered wood, secured with a rusted chain and padlock that looked decades old. My mouth went dry as we followed the footprints. They stopped abruptly at the well's edge, as if whatever made them had simply vanished or descended. My skin prickled with goose flesh despite the morning warmth. Marco's wife recalled something from the property listing, a brief mention of the well being permanently sealed following an incident years ago. My curiosity overrode my growing unease. While the others prepared breakfast, I searched online for information about the property. My fingers trembled slightly as I typed, a reaction I told myself was merely caffeine on an empty stomach. What I found made my blood run cold. 30 years earlier, a young woman had been trapped in that well for 3 days. She'd been exploring the abandoned property, fell in, and survived by clinging to the narrow ledges. Though eventually rescued, she was never the same afterward. According to local accounts, she spoke constantly of something else down there with her, something that whispered to her, that tried to take her deeper. She spent years in psychiatric care, insisting that what lived in the well was trying to find a way out. That evening, an unseasonable storm rolled in. As rain lashed against the windows, the power failed, plunging us into darkness, broken only by candles and flashlights. The wind carried sounds that seemed almost like words. My rational mind offered explanations, branches scraping against the roof, the old house settling. But these reassurances felt hollow. I found myself drawn to the back window, staring at the well now barely visible through the downpour. A flash of lightning illuminated the yard, and for a split second, I thought I saw the wooden cover slightly ajar, the chain hanging loose. My pulse thundered in my ears as I pressed closer to the glass. Another lightning flash. The well cover was definitely open now, and beside it, I stopped breathing entirely, stood a small figure, motionless in the rain. Not a child, though similarly sized. Its proportions were wrong, limbs too long, head slightly too large. It stood facing the house, facing me, its features obscured by distance and darkness. I jerked away from the window, a strangled sound escaping my throat. When my family asked what was wrong, I couldn't form the words. By the time I convinced another adult to look with me, both the figure and the storm had vanished, leaving only the sealed well under clear, star-filled skies. We left the next morning, cutting our weekend short with vague excuses about work emergencies. I haven't told anyone what I saw. Sometimes I convince myself it was a hallucination, born from suggestion and ghost stories. But in quiet moments, I remember the caretaker's averted eyes, and I wonder if he knew what watches from that well, patient and hungry, wearing a shape that almost resembles a child, but isn't, not anymore. Sometimes in dreams, I hear it crying, calling for someone to come outside and find it. And I wake up checking the locks on my doors, wondering if what escaped that night followed us home, waiting for an invitation inside. The house seemed to watch me from the moment I arrived. Standing alone at the end of the beach, its weathered facade peeled away like old skin, revealing darker wood beneath. Windows like vacant eyes stared out at the endless gray ocean. I hadn't wanted to come here, this inheritance from my late aunt, but the legal matters surrounding the property required my presence. One weekend to organize things, I told myself. Just one weekend during the holiday, and I could list it for sale. I never believed in ghosts until I spent a night in that house. The first signs were subtle. The way the temperature dropped in certain rooms, despite the heating system working perfectly elsewhere. The persistent smell of salt and something else, something older and more primitive, that no amount of open windows could dispel. The creaking of floorboards when I was absolutely certain I was alone. I spent that first day sorting through decades of accumulated possessions. My aunt had been a recluse in her final years, rarely leaving the property. According to locals, she'd become increasingly paranoid, rambling about someone coming back and finding what was hidden. I'd dismissed these stories as the idle gossip of a small coastal town with too little excitement. By late afternoon, exhaustion had settled deep in my bones. The house was larger than it appeared from outside, with narrow hallways that seemed to stretch and twist in impossible ways. More than once, I found myself in rooms I didn't remember entering. A chill ran down my spine as I realized the sun was setting, casting long shadows across the worn hardwood floors. That night, I tried to sleep in what had been my aunt's bedroom, but rest wouldn't come. The wind howled outside, slapping waves against the shore and rattling the windows. The house creaked and groaned like an old ship at sea. My heart raced each time a new sound emerged from the darkness. I lay awake, my mouth dry, my body tense, as if preparing to flee from some unseen danger. It was just past 3 a.m. when I first heard it. A slow, deliberate footstep directly above my head. Then another, and another. My breath caught in my throat as I realized what I was hearing. Someone was walking in the attic. I tried to rationalize it. Old houses settle. The wind can create strange acoustics. Perhaps an animal had found its way inside. But the footsteps continued, methodical and purposeful. And then came the scratching, a slow, persistent drag across the wooden ceiling, as if someone were pulling their fingernails through the timber. My skin erupted in goosebumps. Sweat beaded on my forehead despite the chill in the room. I lay paralyzed, listening as the footsteps moved from one end of the attic to the other, back and forth, for what seemed like hours. When morning finally came, I convinced myself I'd imagined it all. A waking dream born from exhaustion and an unfamiliar environment. But as I sipped my coffee, staring at the ceiling, I couldn't shake the feeling that something was waiting for me up there. I spent the second day avoiding the pull-down attic stairs at the end of the upstairs hallway. Each time I passed them, my heart rate accelerated and a cold sweat broke across my skin. By evening, I knew I couldn't leave without investigating. Whatever was up there, real or imagined, would haunt me if I fled. The attic stairs creaked ominously as I climbed. My flashlight beam cut through the dusty darkness, illuminating cobwebs and forgotten furniture. The air was thick and stale, difficult to breathe. My hands trembled as I swept the light across the space, half expecting to find someone or something crouched in the shadows. That's when I saw it. An old sea chest, positioned directly above my aunt's bedroom. As I approached, the temperature plummeted. My breath fogged in front of me despite it being summer. The wood of the chest was dark with age, bound with tarnished brass fixtures. A heavy padlock secured the lid, but as I drew closer, I realized it was already broken. And there was a sound, faint at first, then unmistakable. A rhythmic thumping from inside the chest, like a heartbeat. My own heart hammered against my ribs. Every instinct screamed for me to turn and run. Instead, I reached out with trembling fingers and lifted the lid. Inside, I found no monster, no body, nothing that could have made that sound. Only a stack of old photographs. They spilled across the floor as the chest opened fully, spreading out like fallen leaves. Family photographs spanning decades, beach vacations, holiday gatherings, birthdays, all of them familiar scenes from my own family's past. But each photo had been mutilated in the same way, the same corner torn off, removing the same person from every image. As I knelt to examine them, a gust of wind blew through the attic, though no windows were open. The photographs swirled around me like a cyclone, and in that moment I felt it, a presence behind me, watching, breathing. The air grew dense with malice. I turned slowly, my muscles rigid with terror, but saw nothing, only shadows that seemed to move independently of my flashlight beam. That night, the footsteps returned, louder, more urgent, no longer confined to the attic but moving throughout the house, down the stairs, through the hallway, stopping outside my bedroom door. I lay rigid under the covers, my breathing shallow, my throat constricted with fear. The doorknob turned slowly, the hinges groaning as the door opened inch by inch. The next morning, I called a local historian who reluctantly shared what the town knew about my aunt's past. How she'd had a fiancé who disappeared mysteriously. How she'd been the primary suspect, but was never charged. How she'd systematically erased him from their shared history, destroying evidence of his existence. As the historian spoke, I felt my perception of reality shifting. The photographs flashed in my mind, each with that same corner missing, as if someone had been literally torn from history. That afternoon, I found a hidden compartment in the attic floor, directly above my bed. Inside was a single intact photograph, the missing pieces from all the others, assembled to form a complete face, a man's face, staring with lifeless eyes. I don't remember much about leaving the house, just the overwhelming panic, the sensation of being followed, the feeling that something had attached itself to me. I left everything behind, the photos, the chest, my aunt's possessions. I signed the property over to the town the following week. I still feel watched sometimes, still hear footsteps in empty rooms, still catch glimpses of a man's face in reflective surfaces, always in my peripheral vision, always gone when I turn to look directly. And sometimes when I look at old family photos, I notice corners that seem freshly torn, as if someone is slowly removing me from history, piece by piece. The glow of my phone's GPS was the only light guiding me through the maze of half-finished apartment blocks. The development stood like a skeletal monument to abandoned ambition, most of the buildings mere concrete shells with gaping window holes that resembled hollow eye sockets in the darkness. I shouldn't have accepted this delivery, not at 11:43 p.m., not to this place. But tips had been scarce this week, and the app had promised a generous one for this late-night run. The address led me to Building D, a 12-story monolith that seemed more complete than its neighbors, though no less forbidding. My headlights illuminated a chain-link fence with a gap just wide enough for a person to slip through. The security booth was empty. Construction equipment sat in eerie stillness, frozen mid-task, as if their operators had simply vanished. I parked and grabbed the pizza box, its warmth a strange comfort against the unseasonable chill. The building's entrance was unlocked, unusual for a construction site. I tried calling the customer again, but just like the previous 3 attempts, it went straight to voicemail. I was about to leave when something caught my eye. A faint blue light blinking rhythmically from one of the upper floors. A cell phone screen, perhaps. Someone was up there, waiting for their pizza. The elevator was non-functional, of course. As I began climbing the concrete stairs, the sound of my footsteps echoed unnaturally in the emptiness. Each step seemed to produce an echo that lasted a fraction too long, as if something else was climbing alongside me, matching my pace, but always just out of sight. By the 3rd floor, I was certain I heard footsteps in the corridor, a shuffling gait that stopped whenever I paused to listen. I called out, asking if anyone was there. My voice sounded thin, absorbed by the bare walls. No response came, just the distant hum of wind through unfinished windows. The 5th floor brought with it the distinct feeling of being watched. My skin prickled with goosebumps that had nothing to do with the temperature. I turned quickly, certain I'd catch someone standing behind me, but the stairwell remained empty. Just my imagination, I told myself. Just nerves. By the 8th floor, my legs burned and my breathing was labored. But something beyond physical exertion was constricting my chest. The air felt heavy, almost resistant, as if the building itself was trying to push me out. The footsteps grew louder, more confident, no longer matching mine but moving independently, ahead of me, then behind me, then from the floor above. The blinking light was clearer now. Apartment 1203. The customer information on the app indicated it was occupied by someone named Marcus Weldon. I repeated the name in my mind like a mantra, a reminder that there was a logical explanation for all of this, just a customer waiting for his late-night pizza. My hand trembled as I reached for the door of apartment 1203. It swung open at my touch, revealing a space devoid of furniture, devoid of any signs of habitation. The bare concrete floor was unmarked by footprints, except for my own forming in the thin layer of dust. The only light came from the city in the distance, casting long shadows through the window frames that had yet to receive glass. No blinking light. No Marcus Weldon. My stomach twisted into a knot. I approached the window, pizza still clutched in my sweating hands. From this height, I could see across to the neighboring block, and there it was again. The blinking blue light, now visible in a window of the adjacent building, exactly at the same height and position as the room I now stood in. The realization hit me with physical force. The light had been luring me upward, drawing me deeper into the abandoned complex. But for what purpose? My breath condensed in front of me, the temperature suddenly plummeting. The humidity on my skin crystallized into a thin layer of frost. I backed away from the window, my heel catching on something soft and yielding. I looked down to see indentations forming in the dust beside my footprints, impressions of bare feet appearing one after another as if an invisible person was approaching me. My heart hammered against my ribs, each beat a painful reminder of how vulnerable I was. I dropped the pizza and ran for the door, but it slammed shut before I could reach it. The handle refused to turn under my desperate grip. A low hum filled the room, vibrating through the floor and into my bones. The footprints in the dust began to circle me, increasing in pace. I pressed myself against the wall, eyes darting frantically in search of any escape route. The temperature continued to drop until each panicked breath emerged as a cloud of white vapor. Then my phone rang, the screen showing an incoming call from Marcus Weldon. With shaking fingers, I answered. The connection was mostly static, but through the interference, I could make out a voice, distorted, distant, yet somehow right beside my ear. It didn't ask about the pizza. Instead, it whispered my name, followed by a question that made my blood freeze. Do you remember what happened here? I didn't remember. I had never been to this development before. Yet as the question hung in the air, fragmented images flashed through my mind. This same building, but alive with the sounds of construction. My voice, arguing with someone. A terrible accident. Blame being assigned. Paperwork being falsified. The footprints stopped circling. Whatever invisible presence had been stalking me now stood directly before me. The static on the phone call cleared for just a moment, long enough for me to hear. You left us here. The blinking light across the way suddenly illuminated dozens of silhouettes standing at the windows of the other building, all facing in my direction, all watching. The door behind me creaked open. I didn't hesitate. I ran, abandoning the pizza, abandoning my phone, abandoning whatever fragments of memory were trying to surface. I flew down the stairs, no longer concerned about the footsteps that now thundered after me, multiple sets moving at impossible speeds. I burst out of the building and into my car, tires spinning on loose gravel as I accelerated away from the development. In my rearview mirror, I saw the blinking blue light one last time, not in any window now, but moving across the construction site toward the road, pursuing me. I never delivered pizza again. I moved to another city, but sometimes my phone rings in the middle of the night, and the caller ID always reads Marcus Weldon. I never answer, and I never, ever accept deliveries to addresses I don't recognize.